Hey everybody, this is Perch, and a couple weeks ago or a week ago, I don't know, time flies when you're having fun. That's all I know. I did an analysis of Tom King's sales numbers on Batman because there's a lot of people who make comments about Tom King, if he sells, if he doesn't sell. And what's interesting is that the two sides on the Tom King sales numbers tend to go with Tom King's sales numbers were, abysmal, like he lost all of his audience. Or they were, no, he's one of the strongest writers in comics today. And the reality is, if you're talking about quality, hey, that's your opinion. Maybe you love him, maybe you don't. That's you. If you're talking about sales, then we have actually hard data to look at. Now, despite that, by the way, and I'll get to it in a little bit because I'll show a correction, DC did make my life slightly harder by shipping a couple of his later issues in both cardstock and non-cardstock. And so I did revise the numbers. It changed the trend number all of 3%, which was kind of the point of why you use a trend line. It's because it evens these things out. But today we are talking about Brian Michael Bendis. So Brian Michael Bendis came on to Superman with a ton of hype. In fact, Bendis is coming is the very unfortunate tagline that they used for Bendis coming on to Superman and Action Comics. And his arrival has been mixed. There's been some people who enjoy what he does, and then there's been other people who would like to poke their eyes out with a sharp instrument. And when he aged up John Kent, then that people who want to poke their eyes out kind of transitioned to wanting to poke their eyes out and other people's eyes out. So it just got worse and worse. But how did he actually do? How are Bendis' sales? It's funny because on the trades and on some of the comics, they've taken to putting quotes on there like the best superhero comic available in the market today, says Entertainment Weekly. So, the title has to be selling great, right? Well, let me take you through it. I'm just going to put the numbers out here and you can see for yourself. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying the same thing I said last time. If you enjoy Bendis on Superman, then none of what I'm about to show you should matter whatsoever. Your enjoyment of the title is completely irrespective of the numbers. For that matter, your hatred of the title is completely irrespective of the numbers. Things sell and don't sell, and whether you like them or hate them those two things are independent topics. And I want to keep that in mind. I do these videos, and every damn time somebody wants to come in and kind of go at me for insulting the comic they happen to love. I'm just showing numbers here, folks. They're unemotional, okay? The other thing, the comment on the last one, is somebody came in and said, I can't take this video seriously because you didn't comment on the trades. So I actually did pull some trades numbers this time. So hopefully but I'm sure some people will find some other things to complain about. So let's take a look at the full holy crap. This is quite a drop. Okay, so number one. Here is the first problem when you look at Bendis on Superman titles, and it's because the Action Comics Action Comics 1000 sold close to 450,000 copies. Okay, that all sounds good and all, and the way this graph, I separated out Man of Steel. So let me explain first of all what's going on, and then why this is a misleading graph right out the bat. So Man of Steel is there in the yellow. This was a 6-part series, kind of a limited series, getting people prepared for Bendis on Superman. And then he was on Superman and Action Comic sales. However, most videos showed things this way. A 93% drop-off in sales from issue 1 to the latest issue. And by the way, this takes us, all the numbers I'm showing you take us through March. Why March? Well, the pandemic hit after that. Then DC moved away from Diamond, and then the numbers got super dodgy. And one day we'll see the numbers again. But I think it's relatively safe to assume that nothing hugely surprising happened from DC's resumption of service for Superman and Action Comics to now, December. The numbers are going to be about where they were. But this is the thing. So this is a absolutely misleading headline. I saw a lot of videos with the emoji 93% drop off in sales. This is crap. Anyone who's doing videos like this are absolutely very misleading, and for a lot of reasons. But the biggest one was Action Comics number 1000 was an anniversary issue. It actually had a number of stories in it, only one of which was by Bendis and Jim Lee. and it was sold as a landmark issue. It was pre-sold into a bunch of different places. It had a lot going on. This is Action Comics 1000. There's just no logic just starting Bendis's run at issue 1000. And if you do, you get a very, very misleading number, and it's just you're playing very fast and loose with the math if you do that. So a better way to do is do this. So okay, this chart makes a hell of a lot more sense as we look at it. This is tracking Bendis on Man of Steel, Action Comics, and Superman. We're starting Action Comics with issue 1001. We're starting Superman with number 1, and there's Man of Steel over there. Okay, so this picture is fair. This picture presents a much more clear analysis of what was going on at the time. So let's take a look, and let's start real quickly with Man of Steel. So Man of Steel started out with 78,942 copies sold for issue 1, and it ended at 61,000 copies sold. It was a declining curve. Not great to see this. I think the big shock here, probably for DC, is you had Bendis, you had a pretty stellar art team on this book, and yet it still wouldn't crack 80,000 copies. This is well below where other comics were launching and everything else. So I think this was probably an indication that things weren't all particularly right. But if we run the numbers, we saw a comic, again, we're looking at the trend line. So what's a trend line? Well, the trend line is where it takes the exponential curve of what's going on, it flattens it, and this is a more helpful way of seeing what goes on with a comic. Because it smooths out weird little anniversary issues and other things, and you get a more true sense of the momentum of this title. So the comic saw a drop off from 78 to 61. This represents a 22% drop. This is a slightly higher drop than normal for the first 6 issues of a book. This is important. Generally speaking, collectors and comic shops will order, they'll order kind of in lumps of 3 to 6 at a time. And a lot of people are conditioned to believe that 6 issues represents an arc. And so a lot of people will stay in for the first 6 issues and then jump away. The fact that we got a 22% drop right out the gate was not a great sign. This title did ship more frequently. So it means that even the shops were, basically going down in their orders much quicker than normal. So it's an interesting picture here. That said, let's take a look at Superman. So Superman started at issue 1 at 133,000 copies sold. When we get to issue 6, we're down to 52. Now, any way you cut it, that is a really nasty drop. That is alarming. And if we look at the numbers, we're talking about the comic went from 133 to 52,000, and that represents a 61% drop. Now, again, to be fair, I'm going to try and put in every caveat that we can think of here. The first issue, a Superman number 1, is going to sell more copies. You look and see that drop from number 1 to number 2. We basically went from 133 down to a little under 80,000. We went to about 78. That's to some extent to be expected, although you don't really ever want to see a new comic launch and then lose, close to half of its audience. So it lost almost 50% just between issue 1 and issue 2. Okay, not unusual, but still, that's higher. That is a higher immediate plummet. But a character like Superman, you might argue, a lot of people want a Superman number 1, so you had some people coming in for that. But the fact that we continued down from about 78,000 down to 52 by the time we got to issue 6, that is highly unusual. And I again draw your attention to Man of Steel over there in the yellow. Man of Steel did not have that same, level of drop. It dropped slower. Superman is the flagship title. Again, very strong artist on the book. That's more of a nasty shock of a drop. Now, there's a couple bumps. 51,000 copies sold. 66,000 copies sold for the Superman reveals his identity. That was kind of its high point. But by the time we get to March, we're down to 37,271 copies sold. So if we're looking at number 1 down to, this issue here, I think this is Superman 21, that's a 72% drop. That's way higher than what's normal in the industry. That's a much more significant drop. That is almost 100,000 copies shed from issue 1 to issue 21. Now, again, Superman #1, it's going to get more sales, but any way you cut it, that's a bad drop. Over on Action Comics side, we start with issue 1001 at 79,000, just under 80,000. And by issue 6, we're down at 46,000. Now, that's a steeper drop than what we saw before. It's again, taking away that issue 1 bump, that's still a 42% drop. And this is where we've taken away the anniversary issue. Issue 1000 is not in this picture. We're talking about a 42% drop from issue 1001 to 1006. That's a very steep drop. And you do see things level out for a while, but you have a couple blips again. 51,000 for Naomi appearing in Action Comics, and they made a big deal about that. And then you had this Year of the Villain Lex Luthor issue that was billed as important. That got a little bit of a bump. But overall, by the time we get to issue 1021, we're down at 33,000 copies sold. So as an aside, that's way, way too few copies of comics sold for Action Comics for a Superman book, especially one where you had a highly publicized Bendis is coming writer credit, and you had pretty top artists throughout this entire run. You had some of their bigger names. So if we look from issue 1001 to 1021, we're talking about a 58% drop in this series. Again, that's a high number. Okay, the Superman drop was a 72% drop, and again, that was taking a fairly abnormal #1 issue, sold 133,000 copies. This is removing that. You don't have the benefit of that anniversary issue, and you're down at a 58% drop. That's a major, major drop. So if we look at the trend line for Superman, we go from 92,000 down to 38,000. That's a declining 59% trend rate. That's very steep. Over on Action Comics, we went from 74 to 35. That's a declining 53% trend rate. Though that's way too high. Now, why do I think it's way too high? Well, I mean, again, let me pull up Tom King's number. Tom King went from 138,000 down to 78. This trend line, a 43% drop. That was high, and a lot of people were commenting on how it was high. By the way, yes, this is rolling in the cardstock, non-cardstock. This is an aggregate view. So I have corrected the numbers up for the last handful of issues that Tom King wrote. So those are in there now. But if we compare the two together, we're looking at basically Tom King's Batman had a 43% drop from issue 1 to issue 85. And we look at the numbers there for Superman, and it's ugly. I mean, again, there's no other way to put it. Those are some very steep drops. Now, on average, if I look at DC's comic books in general, DC averages around 30% of a drop of their sales. The Tom King's number was above that, but Bendis' Superman was way above that, and that's ugly. There's no other way. There's no other way to put that. If we look, and now for what it's worth, we look at the trade paperbacks. So the Superman Volume 1, the Unity Saga, sold 1,580 copies. It debuted at number 21 on the trade paperback site. Now, this is diamond numbers, and yes, there are numbers coming in from other places, and this isn't all-inclusive by any stretch of the imagination. However, you can look at this and get a general sense of where it's placed on a chart. It's not going to magically have 10 times the number somewhere else. Action Comics #1 sold 1,234 copies. It debuted at number 39. For what it's worth, when Superman, the first volume trade paperback hit, Mr. Miracle was the top one sold at 8,395. If you really want to get into how painful it is, there is this little image title called Man-Eaters that was I think number 16. Superman was number 21. If we look at Action Comics, it debuted at number 39. This was at Magic Order a few months later. Magic Order was the number one trade paperback that month, and it was at 4,743. For people saying that trade paperbacks are definitely the reason why these numbers are eroding, I would just like to point out here that we're talking about a time span, of not that much time. I mean, this entire number set for all of this stuff was from December of 2017 to March of 2020. We're talking about basically, 2 years and change, about 2 years, 4 months. That's not enough to tip the industry all over. When you see these numbers declining like this, when you see this drop, you can't credit that to trade paperbacks making this huge comeback in 2 years. That's not what's going on. And these trade paperback numbers are frankly pretty poor. So overall, what have we learned here? Well, the Bendis experiment at DC, where Superman Action Comics were concerned, did not translate to massive sales by any stretch of imagination. No, people who are claiming yet a 93% drop in sales, that is a very misleading, not accurate view of the numbers. However, you don't need to say 93% to say it's bluntly, it's a fucking disaster to have high 53 and higher, 70 in some cases, drop way above DC average, way above industry average. There's no way to look at these numbers and go, everything is fine. A Superman book should not be selling in the 30,000s. Just, it shouldn't. 37,000 for Superman? No. 33,000 for Action Comics? Again, no. That is an unreasonable number that is just flat wrong. I don't know. It's an interesting way of looking at things. Some will say not fair to Bendis. Again, I'll reiterate, or I'll end this thing where I began. If you're a fan of Bendis on these comics, no problem. Again, you read what you read and you like what you like. How it does in the sales that does not matter. Not for you. It's what you like is what you like. These are just sales numbers. They are inclusive. Yes, they do count the card stock. They do roll in any things. What isn't included in all this math? Digital. From everything that's been told, digital sales accounts for roughly 7% of 7% of what DC shelf sales are digital. A couple titles over exceed. Not Superman and Action Comics from everything that I've seen and been told. There is a possibility there's some reorders and some other things that could go into this, but nothing that's going to change that number substantially. Again, the reason why I use the trend line is because it accounts for this kind of stuff. So even if you have some missing numbers, even if you have an extra 10,000 copies that need to be sold. And in the case of Batman with Tom King, there were a handful of issues that had this cardstock, non-cardstock version. So you had an extra 12,000, extra 18,000 copies to roll into the mix. It changed his trend percentage 3%. That's it. So these numbers are relatively solid of what they come into. Are they down to the copy? No. But are they in the ballpark with a percentage? Yes. You can very safely say that the drop off on this title far exceeds DC numbers, far exceeds Tom King's. For all the baiting up on Tom King that you get for Batman, he held his audience way better than Bendis did. So something to think about. Anyway, you probably have some questions. Let me have them. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and most importantly, as always, thanks for listening.